Hey, what's up everyone? It's Cameron with Car Audio Now again. Thanks for tuning in. Today I'm going to be looking at a brand new Sony head unit, their XAV-9000ES. This is part of their growing lineup of head units, amplifiers, speakers, subwoofers, the Mobile ES lineup. I've been covering this lineup since the relaunch in 2021 and have been reviewing a number of their products as they're released. I've been very pleased with a number of their products. The most recent being in May of this year, 2023, which is focused on 2 new amplifiers and of course this new head unit. So in this review, I'm going to unbox the unit for you. As you can see here, this is an unopened box. So I'll give you a first look at it, point out some of the key features and specs, and then take it over to my test bench and hook it up to power so that I can demo some of the key features for you and give you an in-depth look at the interface. So let's dive on in. All right, first things first, this is Sony's first traditional double DIN sized head units since the relaunch of this lineup in 2021. It's very similar to a sister unit that we reviewed last year, the 9500ES, which is an oversized 10-inch version basically of this. I would say this lineup of head units is more geared towards audio quality and audio control than it is multimedia and video compatibility like the XAV-AX series units that we also reviewed, the AX4000 and 6000. It doesn't have a CD or DVD player into it. It doesn't have HDMI, but it does have a lot of cool functionality to bring the most out of your music without the need for aftermarket products like inline signal processors, crossovers, or equalizers. That's kind of the focus of these, along with that high quality audio and high definition audio. I'll get into that in a moment. It's got all the bells and whistles that you really need from a head unit. You can see here from wireless streaming audio via Bluetooth and iData Link compatibility to wireless CarPlay and Android Auto. So it checks the box on a number of the latest features that you're going to want in your dash. So let me go ahead and get started here. I'm going to unbox this unit and lay everything out on the table for you first to walk through some of the components in the box, and then I'll start to give you a close-up of the chassis, the screen, etc., and get deeper into the functionality and features of the unit. So let me go ahead and do that. All right, I got everything out on my table now. This is all the components that you'll receive in the box for this 9000ES. So just starting, and I'm going to go through each of these components here briefly, starting from left to right. The first thing you have here on the far left is your input and output harness. This is comprised of your preamp outputs and all the camera and video inputs. That includes, these are 5 volts. Front and rear, left and right, preamp outputs, so they're 5 volts. I like to see 5 volts for your external amplifiers. It also has a left and right subwoofer output. That's great for scenarios where you have 2 or more subwoofers. And then this harness also has 3 camera inputs. So 1, 2, 3, one of which is kind of dedicated to your rear camera, but then it also has 2 other camera inputs if you wanted to use these for, other locations or cameras in other locations of your vehicle. So that's the main thing with this harness. Underneath this, you have some mounting hardware. This is just mounting it to, this is what you'll use, screws and such to mount it to whatever the dash kit or adaptive installation kits that you're going to use for your vehicle. Here you have your USB-C extension. I'll show you this in a moment, but this plugs into the back of the unit. All of these plug into the back of the unit. Here you have your GPS signal. This is just really meant to help improve the signal that you use for something like Google Maps from your phone, right? It's meant to enhance that signal and better pinpoint your location. Next, you have steering. This is steering wheel control. This is kind of a universal, steering wheel control. I'll get into the interface in a little bit, but it'll likely allow you to program each individual commands on your steering wheel using this. But there are other vehicle-specific steering wheel adaptive kits that you probably would want to get if you wanted to make this installation a little bit easier. Instead of finding those wires and the wire harness, there's plug-and-play ones. The next one here is your microphone. This is what you use when, that's what you're going to use when you're talking. If you're using your phone, wireless phone calls or any other voice commands that you use for the unit. Obviously you have the unit yourself. I'm going to pull all this stuff out in a moment and give you a close-up of that. And then on the far right, this is your main harness. This has things like power, illumination, ground, you can see. It also has all of the outputs if you plan on using, you can see these colorful ones here among others. The outputs that leverage the internal amplifier. So if you don't plan on using any of the preamp outputs for an external amplifier, you're going to find all of your speaker outputs in this harness. So what I'm going to do next, clear the rest of this stuff off the table and then start giving you a close-up of the chassis and the unit itself, give you an overview of some of the features like the screen, et cetera, et cetera. So let me clear off the table. All right, let's start talking about the unit itself. Starting with the screen, what you see in front of you here on the 9000 is a 6 3/4 inch capacitive touchscreen. What that means, capacitive, is that it's closest to probably what you're used to on your smartphone, your iPhone or your Android phone, right? It feels like you're touching a pane of glass. It's very clean, very responsive, but doesn't react to things like a pencil tip or something like that, versus like a responsive touchscreen, which kind of has a cushion, kind of feels a little bit more old school, but is responsive to really anything that touches it. It also, capacitive is typically associated with better, not resolution, but just clarity in general for the screen. Speaking of resolution, the screen is a 1280 by 720 resolution, so pretty good. Below the screen here, you can see you have all your standard buttons. I'm going to get into these once it's turned on. You can barely see them when there's no light. But what's also worth mentioning, two things. One, when you look at the side of the screen from the side here, this screen has an anti-glare film that's put on top to help with sun glare. It typically cuts, what I've seen, maybe 15-20% of the glare. It helps pretty tremendously in certain lights, but it's there. It helps. The other thing to notice here is this bezel-less design, right? So you can see there is no bezel here, and what that does is it gives a really nice and clean edge and integrated look in your dash. So very nice. I like to see those. Sony has these. Some of the other manufacturers do have that too, but it gives a nice clean touch to your dash. Other thing to notice is the chassis. You can see this looks like a single DIN. It's not. This doesn't mean that it's going to install in any single DIN dash. If you did that, you'd probably cover up some controls and stuff under here, and it probably wouldn't even fit in all the way. So what this really does, you're gonna probably need a double DIN dash, but what this does is it gives a little bit more room and flexibility for installation. So if you got like the iDataLink controller, like that could technically sit on the bottom here. It just gives some more room and flexibility for installation, especially when you're putting this into one of the older German cars or something with a very tight space behind the dash. Other thing to notice, just walk through. We walked through all of the harnesses a moment ago, but just to give you a sense of where these go, you've got antenna, you have your microphone input, you have your iDataLink input, you have the GPS, I showed you that, you have the input and output harness where the preamp and video, the video inputs were, you have your main harness here, and then you also have the USB-C, I showed you that extension wire. So the next thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to put this down. I'm going to install this in my test bench. I'm going to hook it up to power. I'm going to hook it up to a camera. I'm going to start demoing the user interface and the features of the unit while there's power on. So let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to install it in my test bench and then come back and start walking through some of the features of the interface. All right, the first thing I'm going to simulate here, you can obviously see this is hooked up to my test bench. I've got it hooked up to power, etc., etc. First thing I'm going to simulate is the standard startup time. So when you turn the key to your car, how long does this unit take to start up? And I'm going to do that right now. Boom. There you have it. Next thing I'm going to simulate real quick, I'm going to turn this back off. Now let's say that you're in the parking lot and you turn your key, you turn the vehicle on, and you throw the vehicle into reverse within 3 to 5 seconds of starting the vehicle. You know, you want to pull out of the vehicle parking space. Now these units typically will automatically default to the backup camera, and the startup time is actually normally quicker. So I'm going to simulate that right now, and I'll tell you when I turn the power on for both. So I'm going to turn the power on now. And now I'm going to throw the reverse on. And boom, you can see, hey everyone. So it's pretty quick. You know, it's obviously quicker. They streamline that process when it senses the backup camera, and it turns on relatively quick. And you can see now we're defaulted. It comes to the home screen. That's what you see in front of you now. So let's start walking through the home screen. So this is what the home screen looks when you purchase the unit. A couple things to note here. One, the clock on the screen is fixed. You cannot remove that. Now you can add custom wallpaper, and I'll show you how to do that via a USB thumb drive, so you can change the background of this, but still that clock is going to persist. And a lot of people have complained about that in previous reviews that I've done of other Mobile ES head units. It is fixed. I went through this settings, and this might be a software update in the future, but as of now, you can't remove that. You can only add custom wallpaper. Now, you can see these icons down here. I'm gonna go ahead and select all apps. Now you can see all the apps. Now the top line here is your shortcuts. And what you can do here is, depending on what you want to have in your shortcut menu, readily accessible, you can click, hold, and then you're gonna drag wherever you want that app to go, and then you're gonna find the one that you want, and then you're gonna plug it on into the shortcut. And then when you go back to the home there, now you can see I've adjusted this this quick icon, or this quick menu on that home screen. Now below the screen itself, you have a number of the buttons. Now that this has power, you can see this a lot more clearly. It's illuminated. I'll get into some of the settings here too, in particular with the brightness of these buttons, and also this is an adjustable menu button here. But from left to right, you have home. What this is going to do is default wherever you are. You click the home, it's going to come back to this home screen. If you also hold it, it's going to turn the unit and the screen off temporarily. So let's say it's 2 in the morning or 12 o'clock at night, you're on the road, it's too bright, you can turn that off while still playing your music. You have volume. This is your custom button here. So you right now it's set to mute, right? So if you select that, you can see this is muted, but you can also, in the settings, you can change this to change the source. So when you click it, it'll actually change the source. Then you have previous and next, and you have the voice activation or recognition. So this is going to tie to the whatever the device that you have hooked up to this unit, right? I have a iPhone hooked up to this right now, so if I click on this button, it's going to go directly to Siri. Without a connected device, it really doesn't do anything. So it's either going to be your Google Assistant or your Siri mainly. So let's just start going down the list from left to right, and I'll get into all the apps. I'm going to go through some of the high level ones pretty quickly, things like radio, Bluetooth, right? Things that are pretty standard across most every head unit. I'm going to go through quickly, but let's start and look at radio. You have your typical radio, AM, FM band, and you have a number of presets. So you can go to whatever station that you want. You can find the preset on the left, and wherever you want this to be applied to, you're going to click and hold it, and then it's going to apply it to that place. And then to recall it, you're just going to click on it, right? Same with AM. You have a little bit more of a limited number of presets. You can also manually tune the stations, like at the very granular level, right? You can see I'm going by 0.2 megahertz versus by like seeking. Pretty standard. I'll leave it at that. Back to the home. The next two on the screen are tied to Bluetooth or USB connectivity. They'll change depending on what you're connected to. I've connected my phone, my iPhone, directly to the unit. It's hooked up to Bluetooth. So when I go to phone, I'm able to access any sort of custom or quick contacts here. You can save whichever contact you want for quick dials. Basically, go to call history, redial. You can go into your phone book, right? Or you can dial a phone number directly from the unit without having to touch your phone. And when you call, it's going to call via wireless, your Bluetooth. Similarly, just while we're on the Bluetooth topic, right? Bluetooth music, that's what this icon is representing here. So if I click on Bluetooth while your phone is connected, it's going to default to whatever music you were playing. In this case, this song is playing from Spotify. So it defaulted to my Spotify. That's the app that I have open. It'll play your Pandora. It'll play your iTunes or your Apple Music. It's going to play really whatever source that you have playing on your phone, even YouTube. It's going to come through and it's going to play directly on the device here. And you have a couple of options here, things like repeat, obviously previous, next, and pause. You can repeat all, like the entire album. You can shuffle, you can do certain things, but you can also select different input levels just to make sure that the Bluetooth levels align with the other levels of your audio. I'll actually get a little bit more into the audio settings between the various inputs in a moment when I go through the settings. I'm gonna go back home. Now let's say you have an iPhone, you have an Android, and you want to leverage the Apple CarPlay or Android Auto instead of just the traditional Bluetooth. You can see this icon up here appeared when you have a compatible device and you set it up properly, and you'll go through this configuration as a part of the Bluetooth connectivity process. But you will, as soon as that device comes into range or your device is connected, every time this unit has wireless Apple CarPlay, wireless Android Auto. So as long as you're within range, it will enable that functionality with your compatible device. So instead of using Bluetooth, and I would recommend using CarPlay or Android Auto over the traditional Bluetooth, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto to actually use a Wi-Fi connection. It's a little bit more stable. It has a little bit of a better in terms of connectivity and audio quality. I found that in most cases it's a little bit higher quality than Bluetooth, depending on what you're using to connect to the device, obviously. But anyhow, I'm just going to go through, and I'm not going to give you a demo of Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. It's the same. It's virtually the same across almost all of these aftermarket head units right now. So if you are looking, and even OEM head units, it's virtually the same across all of these different units. So what you see is my CarPlay. This is the default home screen. You have apps on the bottom right, and these are all of the Apple CarPlay compatible apps that I have listed on my phone right now. On the far left here, you can see it has a spot for basically maps. So this top one is always going to be whatever map app you're using, whether that's Waze or Google Maps is what mine is. Whatever the last one that you use is going to appear here in the shortcut. Your music source is always going to appear here. This might interchange with if you use Apple Music or if you use Pandora. Right now mine is Spotify, so you can see this is the Spotify app and it shows what's playing. You can navigate through your library, all of the various artists that you listen to. You can search using Siri or go through some of the high-level categorical searches, right? And then the third one down here is going to be your phone. This is going to go to the phone functionality. So who are you going to call, right? And you can dial, you can go to your contacts, your voicemail recents, kind of similar to what we went through in the Bluetooth settings, but this is obviously much more tailored to the interface that you're used to, Apple or iOS or Android. So it's pretty nice. And that'll appear here when it's compatible and when you have a phone that has compatibility with Apple CarPlay and it's connected to the device. The next one here is the rear view camera, and this is one of the 3 video inputs that you have on the rear. When I say video, it's camera inputs, not like traditional AV video inputs. But when you click on this, and the video feed is off right now, but let's turn it on. Hello again. So now when you're in here, you can see the guidelines, right? You can remove the guidelines. This is the backup camera, and what I did is simulated turning the vehicle into reverse. But you can also select and modify these guidelines in the settings. So I'm going to go ahead and do that in a moment when I get into the settings as well. But this is simulating turning on and off the camera. Now, if you wanted to, I'm going to go back. If you wanted to remove that dependency or that trigger from turning the vehicle into reverse, and you just wanted to have the, let's say you wanted a camera on the left and the right side of your vehicle, I'm going to go ahead and expand on this. You can see camera 1 and camera 2 in the settings here, and I'll get into this in a bit. You can actually decouple the trigger if you hardwire each of those cameras to 12-volt power, and then you select camera 1, camera 2 at any time those feeds are going to appear. So I'll get a little bit more deeper into that in the settings as well. There's an area where you can modify and kind of configure those video feeds and the camera feeds. So the next thing I'm going to go through while I'm on this app screen is the USB functionality. The 9000ES is compatible with both audio and some video formats. Video support is actually something new in a recent update. When I did my video review of the 9500ES, the unit didn't actually support video formats at the time. So with some of the latest software updates, now both the 9500ES and this 9000ES support video files, which is nice, in addition to audio. So if you wanted to plug in a thumb drive with audio and video files, you wanted to play audio, you wanted to play some video files on the head unit, you can do that. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in my thumb drive here and then demonstrate both the audio and video functionality along with the file structure navigation of the unit to walk you through what that looks like if you're curious about how you would go about navigating through the file structure of your USB drive. So I'm going to go ahead and connect this, and then I'm going to tap on USB. And it's going to default to the first song that's on your drive, which is what you see on the screen here. And from a media player perspective, you have all of the same functionality as you do with Bluetooth. You probably noticed a lot of similarities between the Bluetooth media screen that I walked through a little bit ago and this one, and that's because they're nearly identical. The biggest difference in USB is the icons up at the top left here. When you have compatible audio and video formats, you'll see both a music and a video icon at the top left here, and you can use this to switch between the two very quickly. So you can see I'm switching back and forth between video and audio. And when you click on the menu icon at the top left here, it also takes you to the folder structure, and it defaults to the directory and song or video that was currently playing. To navigate upwards in your folder structure towards your root folder, you're just going to go ahead and click on the folder button here, and then you can see it takes you further up towards the root of your thumb drive. And then you can also just use this to navigate back downwards into whatever song or folder that you're looking for. So the navigation structure here and the user interface is very straightforward and intuitive. Really no instructions necessary to get a good handle of it. It's very simple. But in the folder structure on the top right now, you can also see that same audio video icons here. And if you tap on that, it'll take you from the audio formatted files to the video formatted files, or vice versa, depending on what you're in. Now, this unit is only compatible with select video files. Check out the link in the description to my written review to see exactly which formats are supported. But you can see here that I have a test file with a video to demonstrate this feature. And in terms of navigating your USB drive, it's the same as what you would see when navigating through your audio files. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the video, and it's going to start to play. And on the top right, you can see on the settings here, you can change the aspect ratio here from full to normal zoom, but you can also add captions too. I thought, you know, when I was walking through this video functionality, the clarity was great. The video was crisp and clear. No complaints there. Overall, was satisfied with what I was seeing here in terms of resolution and video and audio playing from the USB thumb drive. Now, two other things. So I've already talked about cameras, camera 1, camera 2. Those aren't hooked up right now, but I'll also get into those a little bit more in the settings. Two other ones that are worth noting: Sirius XM. This comes compatible with Sirius XM. You have to buy the aftermarket or the adaptive module, and you have to have a subscription. I don't have that connected right now, but it is compatible. You're just going to plug in that Sirius XM module into the back of the unit, and as long as you have a subscription, it'll appear here, and you will have access to all of the channels that you traditionally would have in your Sirius XM radio. You can see it's not connected right now. Let's go back though. The other one, before I get into settings, is in the last one here to demonstrate, is devices. So if you wanted to just quickly go in to manage your devices instead of going like through the settings and whatnot, you can quickly go in. Whatever devices are available. Now let's say you and your wife, or you and your girlfriend, you and your buddy have two devices that you've previously connected to this head unit, and instead of using your device, you wanted to use your buddy. You're going to go in and you'll basically click, well, that didn't work because I'm already connected, but you're basically going to click on whatever the device is that you want to connect to, and it'll swap them. So you can go in and out, and you can change whichever device that you want to connect to. You can select whether or not it's using CarPlay or Android Auto or Bluetooth, etc., etc. It's basically a quick menu for device connections and management if you have multiple devices that you want to really interchange and you know, let your buddy drive the music for a little while, for example. Now let's navigate back to the home. The next thing I'm going to go through, I'm going to start walking through some of the settings. So some of the key features, really a lot of the key features that are beneficial in this unit come down to the settings. In particular, two places I would say. In the sound, well, one is the sound. That's where all of the benefits and the differentiating features, I would say, from this unit to, you know, a lower quality unit or even competitive units is located. But also there's some cool stuff in the system that I'm going to go through as well. So let's start out with the sound settings. So right at the top of the sound settings, you're going to find the EQ. Right now it's off by default, but when you navigate to the EQ, this is a 14 band equalizer. It has a great level of control over your system. 95% of people that probably purchase this head unit aren't going to need anything broader than this. But when you do get into very high performance stereos and tuning, some of the audiophiles and custom installers do like to leverage a much more sophisticated system. But that being said, 14 bands is among the higher level of control directly on a head unit that I've seen. Now, in the equalizer, you can see these are the bands. Right now it's off. On the bottom, you have a number of presets. So you can do two things. One, you can select a preset that kind of sounds good with your system, and you can go through, listen to the songs that you like, and then just kind of cycle through those and select what you'd like to hear, and obviously ensure that you're not hearing any distortion or something like that. But then the second option here, you can manually adjust and set two custom presets. And to do that, you're going to either click and drag. Right, I tapped, and then what that did was enabled the custom EQ, and now you can go in and you can drag each of the individual bands, and then you can save it. And now you can save it to whichever one you'd like to save it to and come back to and leverage at a later time, right? Let's save it to custom 1. Now that's saved, and now if you wanted to come back and change it, now you can just click save, boom. Or if you wanted to tailor this one a little bit for a different type of song or genre of song, let's save it and let's differentiate. Now we have version 1 and version 2 of your equalizer. So you've got a good amount of control, and it's very nice to be able to customize each of these bands with the touch of a finger, and to save it in 2 different custom presets, especially if you don't want to have an inline EQ or don't have like an amplifier that has a built-in equalizer or DSP. The next 2 are pretty standard. Subwoofer level. If you have a subwoofer, you're going to use those subwoofer outputs in the rear. I showed that to you in one of the harnesses. You're going to be able to turn it on or off, and then you're going to be able to select the level, right? You can come in here and tweak the subwoofer level. Most of the time, you're probably also going to have a separate volume control knob for the subwoofer, but you can go in here and adjust sort of the output at the RCA level. The one below that, another standard one, balance and fader. I like how they just kind of combine this, and it's very easy to kind of set. You click and drag kind of the balance and fader, and basically this is gonna update the volume based on kind of where you're selecting your position, or wherever you're clicking and dragging this. This is gonna focus your volume up in the front left, right, versus the back rear. So let's say you have your child is sleeping in the back rear, right, and you and your wife are in the front. Let's go all the way up to the front so that you can play music up in the front and not wake up your baby in the rear. So the next one here is listening position. Listening position is another tuning feature that's going to enable you or allow you to set the timing of each individual speaker in your car, or channel. Let's say front right, front left, rear left. You can set the timing of each of those channels so that the sound of the speakers will reach one point at the same time. And this is important because your listening position is different distances away from each of the speakers in your vehicle. That means that the sound reaches that point at different points in time, and the delay that causes it'll alter the sound of your music. So by tuning the listening position on your device via the head unit or DSP or whatever other device you're using, it ensures that all the sound from the various speakers in your system are going to reach that listening position at the same time and really optimize the sound of your music. So the 9000ES has a listening position functionality. You can select through a series of presets. Now these presets use averages that Sony probably just estimates from the average size of let's say a sedan, right? I would assume that some of the edge cases like a large Suburban would probably fall outside of the averages and these might not work as well. But Sony also provides you with the ability to adjust them manually in those scenarios. Now in this time alignment configuration here, this custom setting, you're going to measure the distance of each of these speakers or channels from the distance from your listening position all the way to each of those channels. Now let's say that you're sitting in the driver's seat and you want to measure the distance. That's your listening position. You want to measure from the driver's seat, and probably in particular the headrest, to each of these channels. You're going to simply measure from the front left speaker all the way to your headrest. You're going to do the same thing for the front right, rear left, and you're going to enter in the dimensions here in either centimeters or inches, whichever one you prefer to use and measure in. So pretty cool. So let's keep on going. The next 2, final processor. I haven't tested this personally, but what this is supposed to do is just change the DSP settings to really mimic the warm and the sound of a vinyl turntable or vinyl record player, right? It creates a more warm and rich sound. Below that, and here's where we get into some of the advanced tuning features, things like crossovers and the parametric EQ, and I'll show you some of the visuals in here. But starting from the top down, the first thing on the list here that you see is the subwoofer output. Now I mentioned that the output in the output harness, when we were going through some of the RCA outputs, it has 2, a left and a right subwoofer output. So in this section, you can either sum and basically create a single output for both of those subwoofer RCA outputs. They'll be mimicked on both of them, or you can select the stereo here, and what that'll do is it'll create a left and a right. similar to like the speakers where there's a right channel and a left channel, and that's the traditional stereo output, and that will so not only will your speakers have that stereo sound, your subwoofers will as well, so kind of cool. The next here is crossover. So now the crossover section is broken down by the outputs, right? Your front, rear, and subwoofer. That's the same as what you saw on the output harness. So front, you can select high pass. So you basically set the minimum frequency that you want to pass through that channel. Similarly on the rear, it's a high pass as well. One of the things that I feel like could have been done on this section is to have like a band pass where you can alter both the high and the low pass filters in this interface, but for this purpose, it's the front and the rear are both high pass, so you'll set the minimum for both of those if you wanted to leverage them or set them off. You can select the slope for each of these channels. Subwoofer is the low pass, right? So you're going to set the maximum frequency of your subwoofer based on just the broader tuning of your system right here, slope. And then you can also invert the phase. So let's say that you reverse mounted your subwoofer, or maybe you hooked it up backwards, right? You can reverse the phase and bring that subwoofer back into phase depending on how you install it and depending on how you wired it. Now below the crossover, you have the parametric EQ. The parametric EQ is really just a more intricate and visual way of controlling your sound. But what's nice about this is that you can control each individual channels. You can see front left, front right, rear left, and rear right, subwoofer. Each of the individual channels you can control the EQ for. You can get much more granular in how you're tuning each of these channels. I'll click in. Now you can see you can control gains at each of the various frequency bands, right? You just click and drag. You can see the gain increased. You can adjust the Q factor as well, but you can do this at every individual channel. Now the EQ that we walk through applies those settings across all of the channels, but let's say you might have 6x9s in the rear and 6.5s in the front, or maybe you have 6.5 coaxials in the rear and 6.5 components in the front. You might want to tune each of those channels a little bit differently depending on the type of speaker, where it's positioned, etc. So that broader EQ might not be as granular as you really want to get to tune the system, your system, depending on your configuration. So this feature really allows you to get into it, and you can go in and you can select and do it for every channel that you want, from the various channels that this obviously has to offer. The other cool feature, another tuning related feature I would say, is the speaker output control. You can you can toggle on and off each of those channels. This is very helpful for people that would want to tune each individual channel or speaker at a time. If you're like me and you're using an RTA mic to tune each of the individual channels or speakers, this will come in handy because you can turn off all but the channel that you're tuning. And then you can come back if you wanted to tune the whole system at once as well later on. So this is really geared towards tuning, much more intricate way and granular way to tune your system. So that's really all I wanted to cover in the advanced tab, and that sums it up for the sound settings as well. So let's go back out to the main settings, and now let's go into the customization functionality. If you click on the customize option, I mentioned this early on, there's two things that you can really control. One is and at the top here is this custom button, right? I mentioned you can either use it as a mute button, that's how it is by default, or you can set it up to use it as a source change button. So every time you click on the center button, it'll change the source, or you can select a different source, or you can set it to mute, right? I'll keep it at mute for now, but that controls this button. And then the other component here is the wallpaper select. I mentioned this also earlier in the video. You have that big clock in the front. You can change the wallpaper and the background, and you can use a thumb drive, which I already connected. I already have it connected. I showed that a little bit earlier. The way to do that, you have a couple presets as well, you can see, but you see these two plus signs over here. You're gonna click on one of these, and then it's gonna default to your connected USB drive. And as you can see here, I have an images tab where I have test images just for this purpose. So let's say this is going into an F-150 or something, and you wanted to put an F-150 in the background. I'm selecting that image, it's a JPEG, and now boom, it's there. So now you can see this is kind of, it will give you a preview of it. And now you can also see that this is highlighted, it'll stay there. It's downloaded to the device, and now you can also put one more on here just to have kind of two images as your quick set, your quick options. You can select between them. I'm gonna click OK, and then I'm gonna click back home. Boom, you can see now that background is set to that custom image. So let's get back into the settings here. That sums it up for the customization. Below the customized settings, you have the application. Now there's three options in here. One is a camera display functionality, and this is to tailor the various camera inputs that you might use in the back of the head unit via that input harness that I showed you early on. The other two are reflective of two modules that I don't have plugged in right now. They are third-party modules. You have to buy them separately. One is the Sirius XM, and this is basically just a reset for that module. And then iDataLink, and within iDataLink, you're going to be able to have access to the iDataLink configuration and settings. I don't have that plugged in either. But what I will go through is the camera display options. I mentioned this earlier. The 9000ES has 3 different camera inputs in the harness on the rear, and you can use those for really whatever you want. One is dedicated for the rear view camera, and really all it is a title. You could use it for whatever you want. But what's cool about the configuration and the user experience here is that for each of these camera inputs, you can control 2 things. One of the key controls is the image. You can flip it or or keep it as a standard. That depends on how you're mounting the camera. The other option here, and the more important one that I want to call out, is what's called an interruption dependency or interruption control. Now, by default, the rear camera and each of these cameras in the back of the harness have a 12-volt wire, or it's signal wire. So essentially what you're doing for the rear view camera, where that harness says plug in the rear view and backup sensor into the harness, all that is doing is it's creating a link between when you put your vehicle in reverse and when it displays the video on the screen. And when you put your vehicle into reverse, it tells the head unit to put the video onto the screen. And the reason it does that is because of this interruption setting. So if I remove this, now if you put it into reverse, it won't pop up on the screen. So you might be wondering, okay, well, why is that beneficial to me? I want it to always appear on the screen. But let's say for the other cameras in particular, now let's say you wanted to put a camera on the left-hand side of your vehicle, the right-hand side, you might want to put it in the bed of your vehicle to make sure stuff's not flying out. Or maybe you want to go rock crawling, you have a Bronco or a Wrangler, and you want those to be looking at the clearance below your vehicle, and you want to hook those up to a trigger. Let's call it a trigger, but it could be an auxiliary switch. Most of those vehicles like Broncos and Wranglers come installed with auxiliary switches. What you would do is you would install those cameras where you'd want them, and then you would hook those cameras up to those auxiliary switches. There is a dedicated wire on the back of the head unit for each of these cameras that you can hook up to the auxiliary switch. So when you flip the switch and you have this interruption turned on, it's going to override the screen with that particular camera. So if you had 2 auxiliary switches, one was for the left-hand side of your vehicle, the other was for the right-hand side, and you flipped one of those, it would display the respective camera view on the screen. So very cool feature. I've seen this in some of the off-roading head unit applications like the Stinger Off-Road and the Stinger High 10. It's nice to see this on here, and the fact that they give you the ability to control sort of those triggers and how you want to leverage cameras across the vehicle, like more broadly and universally. This feature really allows you to do a lot with your cameras. And the only other thing that I was going to show you is the guideline adjust. So when I turned on the camera, you you saw the guidelines. Now you can change this guideline based on the size of your vehicle, where the camera is mounted. You'll probably want to put it in in front of a parking space, just to see kind of how it aligns with that parking space and where your camera is. But you can adjust the depth, you can adjust the angle. Let's say it's not centered, necessarily. You can adjust the width, you can adjust the width of the front, and then you could remove it entirely so that you just see a camera, the camera feed. So if you did want to use this camera feed, the backup camera input, as an alternative type of video feed, you could remove it entirely. So you have full control over that. It doesn't move. Like if you turn the wheel, it's not going to move like maybe the OEM or the factory backup camera does when you turn the wheel, but it is static, but you do have control over it. So let's go back to the settings. So finally, last thing in the settings, there's a couple cool things in here that I'm going to call out. I'll also just breeze through a lot of it. But so the one thing I mentioned when I was going through the harnesses after unboxing everything was the steering wheel control. So you have the ability, when you wire that steering wheel control, you're either going to use like a plug and play one, which in many cases, if you buy a plug and play adapter for your vehicle, you don't actually have to go in and do this custom assignment of controls. But if you do use the plugs that I showed you, it basically looked like a little pigtail that you would use for a headset with an auxiliary. You'll go in here, you're going to turn it on, and then you're going to set each function based on what you're selecting on the wheel, and the device comes. I mean, the 9000 ES comes with instructions on how you do it, but you'll basically select one of these. You'll hold your steering wheel control, and I might have this backwards, but you're going to hold it, select it, and then assign, and it'll automatically assign it. So, and you can do that for every control on your steering wheel, so that it aligns with whatever the control is on the head unit. So you have the ability to control the steering wheel functions and buttons. Next one is volume settings. So in this section, you have a variety of different types of audio. So media, for example, that includes anything that you play from Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, Bluetooth, or USB. And what, well, you have phone calls, you have ringtone, etc., etc. But what this does is allows you to align all of these to your exact needs. So, for example, if you had a phone call coming in, it's going to chime, and if you thought that chime was too loud, you could come in here and you can turn that down relative to the rest of the volume. So just by turning this down doesn't mean you're going to necessarily turn your audio or your media down, the music, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to turn down the navigational guidance from Google or whatever app you're using. You have control of each of these types of volumes independent of each other, so that one isn't like super loud or super quiet relative to the other. So kind of cool. And then below that, you have optional audio output channel. And what this does is allows you to control which channel your navigation or your beeps or your phone calls comes through. In 99% of the cases, you're going to probably put that in the front door speakers, so the front channel, so that when you're on a phone call or you're listening to the navigation from your Google Maps, it's going to tell you and talk to you through the front speakers rather than the back. But some people might have a preference depending on the installation too. It might go out of the rear channel, so you can select where those types of where that type of audio comes from, right? And you can see it. It's calls, guidance, and different prompt audio. Next one below the optional audio output is going to be the dimmer. You can control the dimmer of the screen, so you can see as you select or increase the dimmer, it gets more dim, and as you decrease it, it becomes brighter. And when you select this button down here, this is going to tie the dimmer with your headlight. So if it's wired properly, basically the setting that you can see here where it's getting dimmer and brighter, this setting will apply whenever you turn your headlights on. Now, in this case, there's no headlights. It's not gonna dim. So, but just know when you enable this feature, it's gonna tie it to your headlights and apply that dimmer whenever your headlights are on. Next two are kind of related to the buttons down here. You can turn the illumination off entirely for good, turn it on, but you can also adjust the brightness. So similar to the screen, it's kind of like dims them. So you can adjust the brightness. Now it applies this permanently, but one thing you can't do, these are permanently white, there's no color differentiation. You can't align the color of these buttons with, you know, let's say you're in a BMW and there's like that orange or like or a blue in like a Ford or something. You can't align the color of the buttons with the rest of the dash, so it'll always be white. And then really quickly, driver's position, if you're in the UK or something, you can change it from left to right, or Japan. You have your microphone adjust, and this basically sets like the gain almost for or the volume and the pickup depending on how big of a car you are in, and it uses some averages to kind of tune the microphone. And then the only other thing that's probably worth calling out is the fact that you can come in here, plug in what you'll do is you can download the software from Sony.com. You'll go and search their site for the 9000ES, go to the manuals, softwares, etc., download the software and put it onto your thumb drive, and then install the thumb drive and go to software updates. So you can bring this thing up to speed, or if they have like a new feature that you can download and install it onto this device. So that's all I had for you today. I hope you enjoyed the review. If you want to read up more information about the 9000ES, maybe you're looking for more specifics, some of the specifications and specs of the unit, or you want to read more about like what is high-res audio and what does that mean for this head unit. I also did a full written review of this article. You can navigate it by clicking on the button at the top left hand side of the video. But if you like the content of this video, do me a favor, click on the subscribe button so I can keep bringing videos like this to you. Thanks for watching.